All right, hey everybody, welcome back to the Gulf Coast Growth Show. I'm your host Jason Lee, and I am really excited today. It's not very often you get a chance to be on a show with the FBI, so this is one for the record books for me, and we couldn't be more excited. So we are joined with Rebecca Camara, Special Agent of the FBI Houston Division today, and we're here to talk about cybersecurity, something that's been extremely relevant here lately. I think we've seen a lot of that in the news, and so today's discussion and topics are really centered around some of the observations that they've seen, some of the tactics and tools that you as an owner or operator could use and deploy for yourself in regards to being more protective and making sure you're cognizant of some of the things that could help you avoid that down the road. Potentially when to get the FBI involved, right? And when's a good time to reach out to them and get them engaged. She's going to share some great knowledge, a few links for you guys that'll be in here for the episode so that you can follow in and get some more added information and just tell us a little bit about where and how she got into the business. So again, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it, and definitely excited for this opportunity.
Fantastic. So, but before we dive in, I think it's kind of interesting, right? You're talking to somebody in the FBI, and you see it on TV and everything, and so you're like, okay, where does somebody who gets involved with the FBI start? Like, how does that work? I just finished actually watching a show called The Americans, which is talking about. It's a cool show. In that show, it's like they talk about all the intricacies of how you become an FBI agent, and so we're all we're probably all scratching our heads. So tell us a little bit about your background. Like, how did you become a cybersecurity specialist in the FBI?
Yeah, so I actually never really thought of being an FBI agent. There's lots of people here that is what they wanted to be when they were younger. It was not something really on my radar. I actually went to school for information technology. I got my bachelor's and master's degree in information technology. Did a bunch of internships, and eventually after college, I went to work for NBC Universal doing computer programming. I was in their leadership program, had a really good opportunities there. I built a movie premiere event application for Universal Studios. I worked on the Olympics, doing their programming and building all their systems, all sorts of great opportunities. But unlike some other things, I grew up in the Northeast and very familiar and fond of the Northeast. And during one of my rotations, I was actually in California at the time, and the Boston Marathon bombing happened. At the time, a lot of people think of 9/11 as the event to join, but for me, I was a little on the younger side. I remember it clearly, but it didn't really hit us home as much as the Boston Marathon bombing happened. And around the same time, actually, NBC had an incident, and I was working in their cybersecurity, and that's how I found out that the FBI recruits people to do cyber investigations. And I started my interest from there, and I decided to jump on board, put in, got the job, and loving it ever since.
Wow, that's awesome. So, and it's so interesting because you just picture what the FBI does day in and day out, and how many different woven parts that are involved, and we live in like a new environment. Like it used to be that criminals and crime were in high speed car chases and things like that, but now it feels like more and more criminal activity is happening. Really, for lack of a better term, underneath your nose from your computer and your phone and all these other places that people are cracking in and figuring out ways to essentially create ransoms, hostage situations, but taking over people's entire organizations. And so that's really the purpose of today's show. We've seen some of that recently in the news. And so tell us a little bit, that gave you a little bit about your background, but can you tell us a little bit about maybe your specialty and what your particular department is focused on?
Yeah, so I'm here on our cybercrimes task force, and we partner with HPD or the Houston Police Department. We have NASA. We partner with Secret Service. And we all work together, and we investigate various criminal and national security investigations. My specialty, particularly, is on the criminal side. So we look into ransomware, business email compromise, insider threats in terms of hacking and disgruntled employees, destructions, those types of things. We've also looked at SIM swapping. There's always something new coming up. I think one of the latest things we've seen is mobile malware. So it's always changing in the cyber field in terms of what we're investigating or the new trends that are coming out. But generally, those are some of the main topics that we see.
Yeah, it's interesting because you think about how rapidly people have to be able to keep up with technology, just to stay competitive in the marketplace, and make your organization operate at the speed that it needs to be competitive. I can't imagine how difficult it must be to try to stay out in front of criminals and all the technology advances that these guys. I mean, I think there's people who spend just as much time as, for example, they have the Bill Gateses of the criminal world, I'm sure, who are just masterminds in figuring out how to do this. And so you guys are probably trying to crack codes regularly. Lately, we've seen some interesting stuff. Just it seems like it's perfect timing for the show because of what we've witnessed in the news lately, both in the oil and gas space as well as in supply chain and food demand and food supply here recently. So there have been some high profile cases specifically to ransom and what it is that you're dealing with. What are you guys seeing, or what do you perceive as the reality of our current environment when it comes to this type of activity? Is it picking up? Is it ramping up? Is it getting more significant? What are your thoughts there?
So with ransomware, it's not really picking up in terms of there's more attacks. It's just that ransomware has been around for a while, and every now and again we're seeing more different strains of ransomware or families of ransomware. We're seeing different tactics. So before we were seeing more ransomware as a service. We're still kind of seeing that, but now we're seeing a lot of exfiltration in terms of as a backup, in addition to the ransomware. So people will go in and actually exfiltrate data, and then they'll encrypt. It's kind of the double-edged sword of, okay, if you don't pay me your ransom, well, we have your data, so we're going to release it. So it's a kind of a backup plan that we're starting to see. With ransomware, I think it's going to be around for a while because it tends to be pretty lucrative and works really well for them. It's hard to prevent without some good hygiene and catching it early. So there's things that potentially companies can do, but in terms of it's going to be around for a while, and I don't see it ramping up per se, but I see it always changing and adjusting to the environment to stay ahead of the game and not get caught.
I like what you refer to when you use the term hygiene, because it seems like it's like anything, right? When you show up at the dentist and your teeth are falling out, and you say, "Hey, what should I do?" And they say, "Hey, you probably should have started brushing your teeth a while back. You got to brush your teeth." I think of cybersecurity as something as simple, not simple, but as it is premeditated, not post-meditated. You can't come in after the fact and say, "What do I do?" I guess your job is about educating, and that's kind of the purpose of that as well, right? Is how do we keep this from happening? Which is a great parlay to our next question, which would be, what are some things companies should be doing to prevent this type of stuff? What are some preactive or hygienic measures they should be taking?
Yeah, I think in terms of your good cyber hygiene that we just talked about, definitely always having backups. And the key to the backups is having them offline, because if you have your backups connected to the network, they could go in and encrypt those as well, and then the backups become useless. Training your employees is always good because you can put in some of the best tech in the world, but your employees can be easily social engineered, and that will be your breaking point in your system. So you invest millions of dollars into having a firewall and network logs and alerts, which is all good, but it needs to look at it like a defense in depth type of solution, looking at trying to become a harder target. There's certainly in the cyber world, there's nothing you can absolutely do to never get attacked, but it's about having that defense in depth and having the response in place in the event an attack happens. So responding immediately is probably the key, and catching things early is also what I've seen
Mm-hmm.
turn out better for companies if they have those things in place.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think you're spot on. I mean, you could do all the great work in the world, but if there's still humans involved, there's a chance for gaps there from a technology perspective. So educating and keeping your people informed that it is now a new major thing that they have to be cognizant of. I'm in the wellness or financial space, and so we do a lot of regulatory work on practicing that type of hygiene to ensure that we don't put it in jeopardize people's information. So, but it's now having to probably scale down to every level when you think about it. The person answering the phones to the person, working the front, or the person, doing administrative work. I mean, if they have access to a machine with data on it, they could jeopardize the entire organization at any level, right? So that's kind of crazy to think about. So now, so in the case that it's too late, right? You said get on it early. So when is it? When's the time that what are the steps when you say get on it? So you realize all of a sudden this has happened, right? What are the steps that an employer or company needs to take to move from, okay, I think we're jeopardized, we're compromised here. Beyond besides calling their IT department, where do they go? When it's time to move past that.
Yeah, I think contacting your local FBI field office is really important early on. Obviously, we always like companies to engage with us before they're a victim of a crime, to have those relationships in place. And one of the ways that they can do that is looking into the InfraGard chapter in their area and potentially making sure that they apply and become members of that. But if you happen to not have engaged with us early on before the incident happens, engaging with us early on in the incident can be beneficial to the company, because we're not going to come in like you see in the movies and just take over a scene, right? We don't do that. But what we do is we work in conjunction with your IT department as well as some of our partner agencies like CISA and DHS to come in and potentially provide an attack that the company's undergoing. That intelligence can really be helpful for remediation. And that early engagement also enables us to come in and tell you guys what we're looking for in our investigation, and that will be helpful for us to follow up in legal process. These could be things such as network logs, computer images, maybe the malicious executables if you're able to find them, any of the phishing emails, maybe some compromised accounts, passwords, things like that that will help us in our investigation determine the tactics and procedures that the bad guys are actually employing on the systems, because we can do some analysis on our end that helps us either engage other companies that maybe have the same attack in the future. And as we build our investigation up, it will help us to further identify who these individuals might be. A lot of times early on, companies, when they have an investigation or they have an attack and they're not really familiar or they don't have a plan in place for when it happens, they don't know when to engage law enforcement. Also, understandably so, a lot of businesses really just want to get their business back online, and so they might be overwriting valuable evidence that would help us to further our investigation and follow up to identify these individuals. And that's where we can provide some advice in terms of getting that evidence for our cases so that we can go ahead and try to identify these people and go through prosecution. So without the cooperation on both ends in terms of giving the intelligence about what we know, as well as getting evidence from the companies, it's really a partnership.
Great. And thank you about that. And you mentioned there's pre-active measures that they can take to getting engaged with you. We'll jump into that in a second. But as we kind of wrap up on how do I do that, right? We'll kind of circle back to that as we wrap up the episode. But so you talked about when's a good time to get engaged. Let's ask this question. So is there what is there advice as to when you should or should not pay this stuff? Like how does that work? So what's the kind of standard approach to that?
Right. So the FBI's stance on that is we do not advise paying the ransom, and that's for various reasons. One of the major reasons is one, it just furthers their criminal organization and their criminal activities to keep going on, and they know that this is a viable thing for them to do. Secondly, we've seen victims pay the ransom and then still not be able to decrypt their files. And so even though that you're paying X amount of dollars, there's no guarantee that you're going to get your data back. And then lastly, uh, there's no guarantee that the company or the hackers won't come back in or haven't had persistence on the systems, which is why we suggest a full remediation of the systems and analysis to make sure that any malicious software or any backdoors are fully remediated and you feel like your systems are back to where they should be. Obviously, we know it's a business decision at the end of the day, but that is really what the FBI advocates for.
Now, on the remediation, is that something that's typically done internal, or is that something that you collaborate with to help educate them on how to ensure that that's done properly? Or are you mostly handling the criminal side? How does that typically work for these companies?
Yeah, so for remediation, we typically, work hand in hand with your IT department. We don't come in and remediate your systems. I know that CISA, that's a lot of what they do. There's a lot of third-party companies out there that do the remediation. But again, it's all about a partnership and cooperation between all the parties at play.
Gotcha. Great answer. Last thing is we get ready to wrap up, and then we'll talk about how to get engaged or to work proactively with you, and you can share a little bit about more some of the sites or places people could visit to get more information. Is there any last bits of advice that you would offer? Any special things that you'd want people to consider as they think about the future when it comes to the criminal aspects of malware and phishing and all the things that are available? So what would be your last little bit of nuggets that you'd want to offer our audience?
Yeah, I think, again, I think cyber hygiene is really important. But let's say you're talking about a small or medium-sized business that maybe doesn't have the capital. Look at least at minimum of educating your people. Also, look for the consumer and industry alerts to know what's going on in the field. Look at ic3.gov, which is one of our websites where you can file complaints, but we also put out reports, yearly reports, as well as quarterly and different notifications for people to read up about what's going on. The yearly reports have the statistics about what we're seeing in terms of different trends, what's being reported, how much potential loss there was, the different types of crimes, where victims are located, all sorts of things that will be useful to really stay up on what's going on and to take that information back and implement it into your company in some sort of way to prevent an attack.
Fantastic. And I think the real great nugget of information there is, regardless of what level you are from an affordability perspective, there's resources that are available from an education and employee education perspective. And so if it's kind of like when you, again, back to the hygiene, I love that analogy. You don't get to the end of the year and then look at your bank account and determine as a company if you're going to make money or not. You kind of have to look at your bank account along the way to determine if you're profiting. Same thing with IT. If you're not looking at these resources, you don't want to wait until the bad thing happens and then you wake up and say, okay, well, now I'll have to, I've jeopardized my whole system. It's going to cost me tons of money, remediation, all this stuff that I'm going to spend because I maybe didn't take these steps up front. You want to look at it constantly because it's a constant threat, it sounds like. So with that being said, perhaps you could, wrap us up with we talked a little bit earlier. So I want to be proactive. I want to get off this, podcast. It resonates with me, and I say I need to jump in and take action here. What would I do from here to be a little bit more proactive with with reaching out to you guys and getting engaged early on?
Yeah, so like I said, early on, look at the press releases. We have lots of good information on our social media, on our website about what's going on. Also, look in the area. We have InfraGard chapters throughout the U.S., which is a public-private collaboration organization, which you can join and put in an application. It provides a lot of good information as well as networking throughout the different industries, not just with government, but within each other. Also, looking at ic3.gov is really useful, not just for reporting different crimes. With ic3.gov, I always suggest to people, no matter how small you think an incident is, always just file it there, because then you know that you're reporting, and if there's a trend that's going to be happening, we'll have that information and we don't have to go track down people and re-notify. So it's a really good tool to put in information, report different things that are going on, but also read all the different reports and press releases that are there. And again, all the consumer and industry alerts, there's a lot of good companies out there that put information that could be useful. And then finally, going back to like your cyber hygiene, just changing your passwords. I know everyone hates it. I hate it, but it's good to do. And on a personal level, just making sure you have your backups, making sure you have your defense in depth, that you're putting in different layers to try to prevent these, making it harder for the next person. That's really what you're aiming for.
Fantastic. Well, you shared some great wisdom today. I think this is one of those podcasts that can literally be viewed as a quick tips guide, right, to things I might want to be doing. And so you were a tremendous value add today. We want to appreciate you and tell you we thank you for your time. So thank you so much on behalf of the Economic Alliance. For our audience, again, this is Rebecca Camara. She's special agent with the FBI Houston Division. She gave some great tips. We're going to try to embed some of the links, this information in the show. So if you're listening on the audio, you can go back to our YouTube and find some of that information on the YouTube video of the podcast. And then, as always, again, the Economic Alliance serves the Port region, but really multiple counties and cities that are touched up against it. You can go to Houston Port Region Economic Alliance, find out more information, and tune in and subscribe to our channels. We try to bring this type of value and consistent education to our member base and make sure that they stay educated and informed. And this has been a very educational and informative podcast. So again, tune in on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. You can subscribe and stay connected to our show and stay connected to the information. And again, as always, we would encourage you to get involved locally with your organizations, be a part, get out of the bleachers and into the field and make a difference. And let's go out there and do some things together. So we'll see you guys next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Economic Alliance Gulf Coast Growth Show. And we'll see you next week. Thank you again, Rebecca, for your time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Have a great day.